Hi everyone! As a part of the data analysis portion of my community practicum for my master's degree, I decided to do a quick research project which will investigate associations between chronic and communicable disease prevalence, incidence, and mortality throughout Northeastern North Carolina. So just to give you a little bit of background, Northeastern North Carolina is a relatively under-researched area regarding epidemiology specifically, as well as some disease trends. Analysis of health statistics in this area are extremely important. A lot of the counties in the region are underserved, but with this investigation, I would like to focus primarily on chronic and communicable disease prevalence, incidence, and mortality for individuals who live in these specific counties: Dare, Gates, Hertford, Pasquotank, Bertie, Chowan, Perquimans, Currituck, and Camden counties. So regarding knowledge gaps, prior investigations have compared health trends throughout the entire eastern North Carolina area. This can be found on the community needs assessments that I will be examining, but knowledge gaps do remain present surrounding the predominantly rural northeastern region. And I really wanted to focus on that area specifically, as I've lived here my entire life, and I thought that it would be extremely important to the scientific community to dive into these areas and see where improvement can be made. So as a result, the more urbanized areas of North Carolina have traditionally received a lot more research focus. And in addition, there are no educational institutions currently that study or partake in public health or epidemiological research in any of the listed counties. I was looking around for public health majors specifically or concentrations, and I did not see any for any institutions listed in this region. So regarding data resources, all information from the sources has previously been de-identified. So I did not go out into the community and interview anyone or collect statistics myself, and it did not need to be collected through any intervention or interaction with people. In addition, online, this is available to the public, and the data is compiled every few years through collaboration between North Carolina health departments as well as hospital facilities. And it provides a lot of information on a wide variety of different public health issues, and it is county specific, which I thought was great. So continuing with the data resources, the first one that I used are the 2021 and 2022 community needs assessments provided by Albemarle Regional Health Services. Now, this community needs assessment provides information pertaining to every single county that I have researched, with the exception of Dare. They are not a part of Albemarle Regional Health Services, so I did need to go out and find a second resource, which was the 2021-2022 community needs assessment for Dare County, and it's provided by their health department. Now, regarding data storage, security, and IRB approval, the data from the study were stored and analyzed using my two personal computers, and they were password protected because I wanted to ensure that nobody would have access while I was going through this different research. And this also acted as a preventative measure for any potential losses of confidentiality. In addition, I also obtained a determination letter, which was given to me by my school's institutional review board, and they determined that it does not technically involve human subjects directly, so therefore it does not meet the definition of human subjects research, so it is not subject to IRB review. So regarding research questions for this particular investigation, I wanted to cover a couple of different realms regarding, communicable and chronic diseases, and I also wanted to touch on Alzheimer's disease specifically. My grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's disease for many, many years, and every time I do a project, I always like to at least touch on it a little bit and investigate some of the statistics and data surrounding that particular disease. So starting off, the first research question that I wanted to answer was, what are the incidence rates of the most prevalent communicable diseases throughout Northeastern North Carolina? Now, investigating this particular question would be extremely beneficial because we could compare every single county and see which one out of a certain population does have the highest amount of communicable disease. Now, traditionally speaking, when you're just looking at raw statistics, this is hard to tell because the population sizes vary per each county. So when you calculate the incidence rate, you can visually see exactly which county has the highest if the population sizes were the exact same. Now, the next question is, what are the mortality rates of the top 2 causes of death throughout Northeastern North Carolina? I wanted to investigate mortality rates specifically to see which areas of improvement could be made in this realm. And I also wanted to investigate the top 2 causes of death, which are almost always heart disease and cancer, and see in which counties were they the most prevalent. Now, the final question that I wanted to answer was, what are the disease-specific mortality rates of Alzheimer's disease throughout Northeastern North Carolina? If we understand which counties have higher rates, we can try to understand exactly what could be causing it. As we know, Alzheimer's disease can occur for a variety of different reasons: genetic, lifestyle, and environmental. So if we're seeing a lot of cases of Alzheimer's and a lot of mortality rates of Alzheimer's in specific counties, we can really investigate this further and see, is there a common denominator here? What can we do to prevent this from happening in the future? Is there anything that we can do to lower these numbers in the future in comparison to other counties? Is there an exposure that individuals in these counties have that others do not? There's a lot of questions here, so this is the very first step to answering those. Now, regarding methods, I wanted to make this very brief regarding the presentation, but I also wanted to very clearly explain what I did. So regarding incidence rate, you would take the reported cases of a certain disease on an annual basis, and then this would be over the size of the population on an annual basis. So this particular formula was used to examine the communicable disease rate specifically. And then you get to choose the number when you're using this formula depending on the commonality of the disease. So I just chose 10,000 to express this incidence per 10,000 individuals. Our populations in a lot of the counties throughout Northeastern North Carolina sit somewhere around this number, so I thought this would be a solid baseline to visualize the incidence rates. Also, I retrieved these formulas from the Gordis Epidemiology textbook that I've actually been studying for my master's degree. Methods continued. For the mortality rates, I used the following formula. Reported mortalities from a certain disease, which would be annual, over the number of individuals in the population, and this would be an annual basis as well. And then this would be multiplied by 10,000 as well, because I chose to express the incidence per 10,000 individuals. And this particular formula was used to examine the chronic disease rate specifically, as the chronic diseases were often associated with mortalities rather than cases. And again, I did retrieve this formula from the Gordis Epidemiology textbook that I've been using. So regarding results, I thought this was very fascinating. So this is the communicable diseases specifically, which would answer the very first research question. So out of all the Northeastern North Carolina counties, Bertie was actually found to have the highest incidence rates of chlamydia, and this was followed by Hertford and then Pasquotank. And overall, chlamydia was traditionally the #1 communicable disease in every single county. Then Chowan was found to have the highest incidence rates of gonorrhea, and this was followed by Pasquotank and Hertford. Both of these are STIs. And then finally, Chowan was also found to have the highest incidence rate of hepatitis C, followed by Dare County. And what I found interesting here was that Hertford and Pasquotank were involved in high incidences of chlamydia and gonorrhea specifically. Continuing on the results for chronic diseases, Chowan was actually found to have the highest heart disease mortality rates out of all the Northeastern North Carolina counties, and this was followed by Gates and Hertford. Again, more questions arise here. Why does Chowan have the highest heart disease mortality rates? Do they have equal access to care, primary care? What is going on here that's causing these rates to be so high? In addition, Perquimans had the highest cancer-induced mortality rates, and this was followed by Chowan and Bertie. And Bertie also had the highest rate of Alzheimer's disease-specific mortalities, and this was followed by Chowan and Hertford. I wanted to provide an example of data analysis for the communicable disease incidence rates. So again, this helped me answer the first research question, and this example is for Gates County specifically. So as we look at this chart, we can see communicable disease type. So these were the most common communicable diseases that were reported in these needs assessments. And then we have the reported cases column, which is on an annual basis, as well as the population size. So when we take the formula that we pulled from the methods and we do an incidence rate per 10,000 individuals, we have found that the incidence rate of chlamydia in Gates County is 33.73 specifically. And as we look at all of these diseases, we can see the incidence rate for the rest of them, but I wanted to provide an example of what was done. So regarding the data analysis for heart disease mortality rates, we have the county name column, as well as reported deaths and the population size for each region. And we took the formula for the chronic diseases from the methods as well, and used it to determine the heart disease mortality rate. And this is per 10,000 individuals as well. And then we have to break this down and look and see exactly which one has the highest prevalence. So in this particular scenario, as we can see, Chowan has the highest heart disease mortality rate out of all of these counties. Now, regarding cancer mortality rates, we would take a very similar approach. Again, we have the list of county names, as well as reported deaths, as well as the population size. And then at the end, we have the cancer mortality rates. And as we can see here, the highest rate for this particular area is per Quimens. Now, regarding disease-specific mortality rates of Alzheimer's disease, again, we followed the same formula with the county names, the deaths, and the population sizes. Using that formula per 10,000 individuals, we can determine that the highest incidence is in Bertie County. Now, I wanted to turn this into a graph as well, because a lot of times it's easier to visually depict. And I wanted to involve the top 3 communicable diseases throughout Northeastern North Carolina. As we can see, the blue indicates chlamydia, the red color indicates gonorrhea, and the green is hepatitis C. Next, I wanted to visually examine the mortality rates of the top 2 causes of death throughout Northeastern North Carolina. On a widespread scale throughout the country, typically the top 2 diseases are always heart disease and cancer. But as we can see, there are some fluctuation in this regarding counties. And this graph also helps to visually depict exactly which counties do have the highest levels of mortality when you compare them evenly. Now, finally, I did want to include a bar graph on Alzheimer's disease specific mortality rates throughout Northeastern North Carolina. And this one is really easy to see as there are not too many categories in this particular realm. So, as we notice, Bertie is the highest regarding Alzheimer's disease specific mortality rates. And we do have these rates on the y-axis, and this is per 10,000. And then the county name is on the x-axis. But as we can see, the lowest levels are in Currituck specifically. So regarding discussion, there's a lot of information here. So I'm going to go ahead and encourage a lot of future research in this realm to find preventative measures for chronic and communicable diseases. We have the data in front of us, so we need to really do a deep dive and figure out, could this potentially be an exposure that is leading to this? This would be the most beneficial in areas with high rates of disease. For example, there could be a lack of sexual education currently in Bertie and Chowan counties. And we've noticed that this could be an issue because the incidence rates of chlamydia and gonorrhea are much higher. Or I could be wrong, and there could be another confounding variable that is increasingly altering these rates. So we need to do a deep dive and a further investigation and expand this research because there is such a large knowledge gap in this particular realm. And I would love to investigate this further and see if we can find exactly which exposure is causing these outcomes and ultimately reduce these rates. Regarding chronic diseases, we're probably not going to see a drastic change. If we do find a correlation, we can lower these rates of disease. And I did want to include the references. But right now, that is what I've concluded on this data analysis portion of my research. As I mentioned previously, I would love to further examine this in even more detail and depth and really figure out what is correlating here. And so we can ultimately reduce these cases and these chronic diseases. Thank you.